Chapter 7, Space Travel Today. There were 5 more American moon landings between 1969 and 1972. During that time, the Soviets kept trying to put cosmonauts on the moon. They were never successful. Finally, the Americans and the Soviets agreed to plan a mission together. In 1975, an American spacecraft joined with a Soviet spacecraft in orbit. The cosmonauts and astronauts shook hands. They shared a meal as they orbited Earth together. The space race was over. A new era of space cooperation had begun. In July 1975, astronaut Thomas P. Stafford shook hands with cosmonaut Alexei A. Leonov in space stations. When they weren't able to land a man on the moon, the Soviets began working on a different kind of space project. They began to build space stations. A space station is like a house in space. There is room inside for space travelers to eat and sleep. There is also room for them to conduct many kinds of experiments. An experiment is a test to find out or prove something. Between 1971 and 1982, the Soviet Union launched 7 space stations. All these space stations were named Salyut. Salyut is the Russian word for salute. Soviet leaders named the space station as a salute to Yuri Gagarin. Space stations can stay in space for many years. The United States has put only one space station into orbit. It was called Skylab. Skylab was in orbit from 1973 to 1979. It gave much information about the effects of long-term space travel on humans. In 1986, the Soviet Union launched a new kind of space station. It was called Mir. Mir was supposed to orbit Earth for 5 years, with new parts and many repairs. Mir stayed in space for 15 years. Space travelers from many countries visited Mir while it was in orbit around Earth. Some stayed on board Mir for over a year. They proved that people could live in space long enough to travel to other planets. Mir was finally abandoned in 2001. It fell safely to Earth. The International Space Station. Now, several countries around the world work together on a new space station. It is called the International Space Station, or ISS. Like Mir, the ISS was put together in space. It is twice as big as a football field. From Earth, it looks like the brightest star in the sky. The first parts of the ISS were launched by Russia and the US in 1998. Scientists on the ISS do experiments every day. They are learning how lack of gravity affects living things. They also plan to test spacecraft that might be used on future missions to the moon or Mars. The ISS is a great example of cooperation between countries. The Space Shuttle. For many years, the spacecraft that took people into space were built for one mission only. Then, a new kind of spacecraft carried people into space. It was called the Space Shuttle. The Space Shuttle was the only spacecraft ever built that could be used more than once. The Space Shuttle took off like a rocket. It orbited Earth for up to 2 weeks. Then it returned to Earth and landed like an airplane. The first Space Shuttle was launched in 1981. Space Shuttle Columbia. Parachutes helped the Space Shuttle slow down after landing. The Space Shuttle carried astronauts to and from space stations. It was used to launch satellites. Space Shuttle crews sometimes picked up broken satellites in space, repaired them, then sent them back into orbit. Space Shuttle crews also performed thousands of experiments. These experiments helped scientists understand more about living and working in space. Turn the page to learn about robotic space missions. This way. Space probes. Space probes are robotic spacecraft that are sent out to do research. They take pictures and gather samples. A probe can go to places where a human would not be able to survive. Probes have been to Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. They've shown that Mercury has craters like the moon. Venus is surrounded by acidic clouds, and the gas planets have strong, wild storms. Because of robotic missions, scientists have learned much more about the solar system. Helios probe.